Hello, everybody, to our latest guest feature at IndiCast. Today, we have the founders of a startup that deals with renewable energy, and we have their co founders, Rajat Singh and Mehul Kumar. Uh, we want to have a conversation today about the policy and the business environment in the renewable space in India. So, without wasting much time, why don't Rajat and Mehul, you guys introduce yourself and a basic overview of what your startup does?
All right, thanks for that, Raj. Yeah, we'll quickly perhaps maybe take 2 minutes to introduce ourselves. I'm Rajat, and Mehul's my co-founder. We're running a startup called EarthSync. We are batchmates. To give you a little bit of context, we studied at IIT Madras from 2015 to 2019. Mehul's done computer science. I've done materials engineering, and post that we've had our own journeys to in our own respective fields. But yeah, so just to give you a quick background about myself, graduated in materials engineering, worked in the renewable energy space at this firm called CleanMax, where we were putting up assets for the commercial and industrial clients. And we'll get more into the details of it a bit later. But post that, I joined a battery and cell tech startup called Log9 Materials, where we were looking at commercializing new lithium ion technologies for the commercial and industrial space again, but also in the electric vehicle space. And yeah, post that we realized there's a lack of energy models in India. And that's what Mehul and I came together to build. And we'll maybe discuss that in depth a bit later. Mehul, I'll leave it to you.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Hi, Raj. Hi, Jay. Hi, Rajat. So, thank you, first of all, for inviting us for this podcast.
Yep.
And yeah, it's a very interesting field. And also, I feel a lot of people find it interesting also. So, looking forward to the discussions. And about myself a bit, I graduated in 2019, computer science. Always been very fond of maths, computer science, and then I worked at a tech company for 2 years, and then I started my tech startup. Uh, did it for like 3.5 years, and then I kind of took an exit, and now I'm starting this new venture with Rajat and Sankalp, two other co-founders, and yeah, so we are building a energy management platform for green assets and helping developers and high-end energy consumers put up the projects. So that's a brief about it, but yeah, we'll talk more about it.
Right. I mean, getting into the renewable space, you're dealing with power. So, in my view, as a layperson, one would assume that it's almost like a heavy infra kind of business. So, you would assume that require some amount of ease in the policies that guide this sector. So, why don't you guys take us through the policy making landscape, how easy it is to operate or how difficult it is to operate based on your experience for the time that you guys have been doing this. So yeah, why don't you guys take that question?
And thanks for actually bringing that up. It is a very heavy infra business, right? Like for every megawatt of solar or wind, you need to put up at least $500,000 to $1 million, right? So now if we want to put up gigawatts of asset, that's somewhere in the rough range of trillions of dollars being spent, right? So it is definitely heavy infra. So I think in a nutshell, unless you have any specific questions, in a nutshell, policy making helps you channelize these trillions of dollars of asset in a better way, right? How can you perhaps invite cheaper capital to India? That's the first level of policy making. To the last level of policy making, how do you operationalize these assets, right? You can put up solar, but you still need to connect the solar to the main grid, which is still governed by the Institute of India, right? Which is the government of India, essentially. So in a nutshell, it's about channelizing the capital. Then, how do you operationalize the asset? How do you give incentives to start making commercial sense better out of these assets? Even though, in the news, it is the cheapest source of energy today, but still it's with subsidies. So there are few nuances, and let's maybe get into the depth, as the session progresses. But in a nutshell, it's that. Mehul, if you want to add anything, unless you want to get specific now itself.
Yeah. So from a person, so I did not start from this background. So I'll just give an overview from that angle. So what I find really exciting in this space is, first is you need energy for, development of the country. So that is pretty much clear. Every developing country needs to make sure that their energy demands are met, because everything is connected to the country's growth and progression. And uh, and we know that most of the energy right now is being produced by thermal assets, coal and all. And there is a need to innovate and find better sources of energy. And somehow, if we can crack that, if we can come up with a new energy generating thing which can be like 10x efficient, it's going to be game changer, right? So that is one of the belief I have. That's at like a very core level. And then yeah, and now that with these new tech coming, not exactly new, but it is adoption wise, solar, battery, wind storage systems, and other kind of generating assets. So all this have become very interesting, and we are also trying to figure out the policies, uh, and what are the right things to do in this space, and how much should be done. And overseas, these things have been done. So we are at the stage where we are figuring out how we can leverage this the best. So that's
Right.
And
something
I'm
exciting.
and I'm glad Mehul brought this up about energy hungry developing nations, right? Since we are energy hungry, we actually transitioning to solar wind batteries more of an energy security issue now, right? Because a lot of the times your gas pipelines are coming from countries like Russia, Ukraine, Middle East. Now to have gas pipelines come in, they have to come in from a little troubled land, to put it in the most generic way. So from an energy security perspective, if you can, and we don't have a lot of fossil fuel reserves, right? We don't have a lot of coal reserves, we don't have a lot of uh, thermal reserves, we don't have a lot of gas reserves. So to have like a energy secure transition into a power rich country is where policy making actually helps a lot. So just maybe
Yeah.
putting that into context.
Right. In fact, I'm actually, I'm going to pick your brain more on this question because, we have certain targets. Yeah, there are, I think, 500 gigawatts of renewables by 2030. So, there's got to be some amount of like good government incentive that may be driving you. And there may be some, pipeline, some cholesterol in the pipeline that needs to sort of get out of the way that can make business easier. So I just kind of want to pick your brains on, in your realistic experience, what A may be helping drive renewables businesses or startups like yours in India, and B, what is some maybe cholesterol that we can get out of the way to make a, the ease of doing business more efficient with respect to renewables, because it is a key feature of energy security and our development goals in general, right? So yeah, that's
I'd like to put that into perspective, right? Since everyone knows this 500 gigawatt number, to be very frank, it's in everyone's minds, right? It's
right.
out there in the news.
Mhm.
People who are not even in the industry are talking about the 500 gigawatt number. So, to put that into perspective, the first goal that India set was, and if I'm mistaken, please, I apologize, but I think the first goal India had put was 175 gigawatts till 2022 or 2023, something like that, right? And we met those targets, right? To be very frank, we did meet those targets. Now the remaining 325 or 330 gigawatts need to be put up now from, let's say, 2025 to 2030, right? So to put that into perspective, that's 60 gigawatts every year, right? And 175 gigawatts were put up in like 15 years. And Maybe like the good 50% of the 175 was put up in the last 5 years before 2022. So just to kind of put that into perspective, we really need to accelerate the adoption, right? And that's what policy making is helping us do. We've seen policies evolve from 2015. I myself have seen policies evolve from 2019. Before that, I did not see, but just reading these policies from 2019 also helped put into context as to how policies have evolved only to accelerate this adoption, right? And that is the goal. If we don't meet the goals, it has a repercussion at the UN level. There are Paris Agreement goals that will not be met. Our net zero targets will not be met. Now, it's not like a repercussion only at the CNI level or at the government level, but it's at a international level as well. So just putting that into perspective. But if you can, reiterate your question, like in like a different way, I can maybe perhaps answer in a more elaborate function.
Right. It was in a basic sense. I'm just interested because by the way, Jay has just joined us. He was
Right there.
he was on. He's a My nephew is about to turn 1 next week, so Jay's spending more and more time doing daddy duties.
Oh,
Daddy duties or baby duties? What?
baby
Okay,
duties.
right.
Related
So
dependent
yeah,
functions.
yeah. So, let's just look at it like this. Infra businesses face a lot of roadblocks. There are land acquisition issues. There are, compensation issues. There are issues with respect to, the efficiency of a lot of in the electricity sector prior to renewables. There were questions about the efficiencies of our gencoms, transcoms, discoms. There is a lot of politics around power also, not the political power but electricity as power. But so, these kind of things always bring me to the question that as a layperson, I would assume that there are some policy roadblocks when you get down to doing business on the ground. So when I ask, about the cholesterol, the specifics that I want to answer is that when you guys were, registering your company and getting into this business, what were the challenges that you were facing? And I mean, that's don't let it be like sort of, it can be anything from like maybe funding to, dealing with the government, or maybe it doesn't have to be a challenge. Maybe you guys had a seamless experience. So I just want to pick your brain a little bit about that. um,
Let's get to the last question a little later because
yeah.
I feel we have built what we have built so far on all the success that the giants have had so far. Had we been doing what we are doing 10, 15 years back, maybe it wouldn't be as important. But today it is important for a different reason. So I want to take that question a bit later. Uh, but the first question, as you rightly mentioned, infra business, heavy capital business, there are roadblocks, right? So just to set some context, electricity or the power market is divided into three broad segments, right? One is the consumption. Let's say we are consuming as residential users, commercial and industrial clients are consuming it at that different tariff. So every different type of user is at a different tariff structure, which the policy set every year, right? For example, in Karnataka, just last year, they had reduced the tariff for the residential users. Now it's a political game as well, so let's not actually get into that. But if you're interested, we can get into that as well. To then also increasing the tariff for the commercial and industrial clients, right? So you saw a rift that they maybe got residential tariff lower, but they shifted this tariff to that tariff. So the government is controlling this, right? So the tariff structures, the distribution companies are controlling. So after consumption comes the distribution companies, which is your uh, I think you're in Gurgaon. So if I'm not mistaken, in Gurgaon, who do you pay the electricity bill to? If I may ask you, it's
DHBVN is our discom.
DHPVNL, correct? So that's
Yeah,
the
and in Delhi, I think Delhi people pay to BSES,
Delhi
if
में
I'm
बहुत
not
सारे
mistaken.
हैं. If you see, there are four
Right.
discoms, right? So now
Okay.
what happened was these discoms or the distribution uh, licensing was actually opened up to whoever wants to come into play. Like in Bombay, Adani and Reliance distribute the power, right?
Right.
In Tamil Nadu, there are a few other guys. Most likely in most states, distribution companies have been government, but in at least the major cities, a lot of the private players were also coming into picture, right? So consumption, distribution, then comes the transmission, which is completely owned by the government, right? That's your transcom companies, which the energy regulators own and operate, right? And after the transmission comes your generation. So as per the Electricity Act of 2003, the generation game and to some extent the distribution game was delicensed. So before 2003, everything the government was owning, right? From the assets to operationalizing to putting the policies, everything was owned by the government, right? But
Then you
after,
made the sector more competitive. Sorry to cut you off.
yes,
Like you
exactly.
involved private sector a bit.
Exactly. And also because, if I'm not mistaken, maybe, perhaps different folks will have different ideologies behind this, but governments were incurring heavy losses, right? Because they were owning every business. They were giving subsidies also to make the power business grow. So they were taking all the burden, right? So to relax it a little bit for them in a very layman language is, I feel, why they de-license the activity, and also, as you mentioned, to make it a lot more competitive in nature, right? So the first thing that they did was, hey man, at least make the generation activity de-licensed. So what I mean by de-licensed is, you, me, Mehul, Jay can put up our own asset and sell the power to the government, right? Now, a lot of countries have done this, but in a lot of countries, you can still just sell power, generate your own power, but still sell power only to the government, which is your distribution companies, right? Your DHBVNLs, your in Karnataka it is Bescoms, in Maharashtra it's MSEDCL, BSES, right? Now you could only sell power to them through these tenders that you see out there, right? But what India did beautifully was they opened up the power generation licensing to the consumers as well. So basically, the consumers could be producers as well. That is seen in very few countries, right? In most countries in Southeast Asia, in at least near our Asian land, in our Asian region, you can only sell power to the government. But in India, you can sell power. You, me, Jay, Mehul can put up an asset and sell power directly to the consumer now using the transmission and distribution lines. So what you do is you sell power, but you pay a right to use fee to the transmission and the distribution companies at a per kilowatt hour level, right? So let's say I'm generating power at 4 rupees and the consumer is taking power from the government at, let's say, 8 rupees. So they will make savings if the 4 rupees plus the right to use fee between the transmission and distribution is still lesser than 8 rupees, right? So all that math we do, and that is where the policy making comes into play. How much to pay for the right to use fee, how much to pay in terms of subsidy. A lot of times in India, you actually subsidize agricultural tariffs. So so the companies who are running it for profit have to pay a cross subsidy surcharge, because the governments are giving them the subsidy, so someone has to pay the cross subsidy, right? So all these policy structures are kind of out there to understand, firstly, whether you will have commercial savings or not. That is the first and foremost goal, right? You're putting up all this, everything is happening, but the first thing you need to understand is, am I going to make savings or not, right? If I'm not, then what is my risk and everything? So maybe I'd like to take that a bit later, but that's to set context, right? Four pillars are there: consumers, distributors, transmitters, and generators, right?
Right.
And from a technical perspective, transmission is at a higher voltage level, distribution is at a little lower voltage level, so all these step downs happen, and then consumer is at the 240 volts that we do, right? And transmission is at, let's say, extra high voltage of 132 kilovolts. Distribution is at, let's say, 11 kilovolts, right? So that's how the technicalities of things matter.
Right. So quite a comprehensive answer. I'm still processing a lot of that, but
Yeah, yeah,
thank you
yeah.
for taking us through that. In principle, at the earlier point you said we can differ ideologically, but I am a big supporter of the argument that lets government get out of the way in business.
Yep.
I always view government interference, especially in heavy regulatory sectors, market interference as a market distortion if nothing else. So that could be one way to sort of pivot our conversation further. Jay's just joined us, so Jay, why don't you take conversation forward and ask questions?
So compliments were its due, because I think this is probably the first time I'm interacting with anyone who's running on a renewable energy startup. I never thought that that space can also be, like, explored from the startup angle, because my perception of startups was like very restricted, and it was mostly towards something which wasn't obviously service oriented. Say, like, my perception of startups was like, application based, which are solving everyday problem, like something like Zomato or Swiggy. And I never thought that even electricity, renewable energy, and all these other things can be explored in that sense. So since we're talking about startups, my question would be, how is the regulatory environment in India, and did you guys have any compliance issues with respect to that?
Mehul, you want to take that up, or should I set some context? I think maybe what will help Mehul is if we explain what we are doing, right? I think that will actually help
Yeah, I
because
think we can also maybe ask you guys a little bit, if you're comfortable, by the way, about your revenue model, about how you guys operate, and all of that. Like whether you
yeah,
guys even like the basic stuffs of whether you're in the B2G, B2C area, that kind of stuff. So I think setting context will help in like knowing exactly what you guys do. So
yeah,
that's up to you guys. Why don't you guys both take this up individually and
yeah,
teach
for sure,
us?
for sure. Because I want to give a context of what we are doing because what Jay and Raj you also asked before was how are we kind of tackling the regulatory environment, right? And that's exactly what we are doing. In a nutshell, what EarthSync is a energy modeling platform, energy data and analytics platform for all energy stakeholders to navigate the whole policy and regulatory scenario of India to commercialize the technology, right? So what we do is we are templatizing techno-commercial impact and policy models of how solar, wind, battery technologies can help them transition into a net zero future, right? So we don't just do techno commercial, which is like, hey, I'll give you your savings, but we've templatized policies of different states as well, so as to help people understand and not go through these, jargons of policy and a lot of documents of policy. What we've done is we've templatized everything on our platform, right? And Mehul can take up the answer from a very math and different perspective as well. But in a nutshell, we are doing that. So answering your question, Jay, we are helping the stakeholders of India, whether they are private players, whether they are banks, whether they are developers of renewable energy, or whether they are governments, to kind of, have like a good database of all techno commercial impact and policy metrics of solar, wind, battery technology.
Understood,
Hmm.
understood.
So if I like from a simplified angle, what how I see is, uh, you have some, if you are a business and if you want to expand, or if you're already running a business and part of your consumption is already coming from, energy. So you're already spending a lot of amount in energy consumption. So then you can go for better investments, right? So that's where we come into play. What they can do is they can upload all their data, like what is their consumption pattern, where are they located, uh, and what type of industry they belong to, and all those things. And then our platform ingest all that data, and we also get the generation profiles for that data, like how much would be solar generation, wind generation. And then the platform will take all these parameters and all your financial parameters, like what are tariff rates and how much how much would be your budget and all those things. And then we output how much capacities you should put, what sort of policy you should go with, right? So there are so many policies, and there are so many different combinations you can do that you can actually get confused like how you should make this investment, and that's when they go to like big consultants to get this work done. So what we are trying to do is we are making this very standardized, tech driven, and on a central platform itself, you can plan your project, and developers will use it to plan the multiple projects they keep getting. And also there is one more catch is India is still like getting on of like digitalization, right? So still smart meters are there, but there is a shortage of digital data present of consumption, and now people have started realizing it and they've started installing smart meters. So the now data is more granular. So what previously people would do is they would analyze on monthly level data. They would just get monthly bills and they will say ki we have this much data only, analyze as much as you can from this. But now you have like 15-minute level of data and policies are more defined. You can actually use mathematical solvers to get the exact answers. Like you can create the financial models, exact financial models ki this much capacity you need to put, and this much risk you would be taking. So full everything we can now model it mathematically, and that's what our platform helps to do. We are getting away from all the Excel based processes, which are like, and every pretty much most of the people are using heuristics, right? Everyone just applies their own knowledge based on their past experiences. But with these mathematical models, you can get the exact answers. And we have seen cases like we have been like 5% more efficient answers than what they came up heuristically. That's where our USP lies. And 5% difference for like 25-year project, which is like crores, like hundreds of CRs worth of project. So 5% makes a huge difference, right? And our weather data is getting improved year on year. Our consumption and like understanding of consumption profiles and newer things like data centers and all coming, which have constant energy requirements, right? So things are getting better, and we are making it better using tech and a single unified platform. So that's our vision, and that's what we are heading towards.
Right. It's interesting that both Jay and I, in different ways, asked you about navigation of policy, and
Yeah.
it turns out to be almost a core function of what you guys are also doing.
Absolutely.
And
And
Absolutely.
also, just to like add, we are also making it easy for people to understand these things. So what happens is we have created a centralized database of all policies, right? We are doing the hard work of reading all the new policies coming on the government websites, parsing them out, making it simpler, concise, so that your normal consumers and developers, they can understand it easily, because that is also a big problem. It's very
right.
difficult, at least what we have faced. It's
And just
challenging
to,
us.
yeah, sorry, just to, sorry, go ahead, go ahead.
Yeah, so the even to parse those policies, understand what is happening, it takes like hours. So
Yeah.
we are doing that hard work one time and making it available to everyone so that they don't need to do all that work again. And uh, since we get more data, like our database grows of policies and all, we would be able to create insights from those policies and use those insights to make our models better. So that is, and also maybe in the future we can help the government also, like all those things open up. Yeah, yeah,
I
Rajat.
think Rajat had something to say, then Jay had something to say.
Yeah.
So we can
So
go in
to
that
tickle
order.
your brain, Raj and Jay, it's basically if let's say you're sitting in Haryana and you are running a plant in Haryana, right? You can now put up a solar asset which is in Haryana, or you can also power your factory from a solar plus wind which is in Karnataka. So these are intrastate, interstate. Now, depending on the location of your generating asset, the state comes into picture, so you have to follow that policy of that state essentially, right? So how the policy is broken down at a central level, there is the CERC, Central Electricity Regulatory Commission, who puts up the broadest policy. Now at a state level, they either adopt it as it is or they adopt it with their own nuances, right? And that's the difference we are trying to kind of uh, templatize as to, okay, if you are running a factory in Haryana, you can now put up solar from Haryana, you can put up a solar plus wind either from Rajasthan, or you can put up a solar plus wind from Karnataka. So you can have like different ways to tackle the same problem, which is your consumption at your factory. Right now, as a user, you only have two goals, either sustainability goals that, okay, in the next 2 years, you want to meet 100% of your power from renewable energy, or the second goal is you're going to be having some savings. Right now, as a decision maker, you're kind of just hovering between these 2 points. And that is how policies at a center plus state level help you kind of actualize and commercialize and make sense of things.
Right. Exactly.
Um, so, what is your opinion on the current current policies by the central government with respect to renewable energy? Do you think it's extremely complex, and that, like, the language that they use and the terminologies that they throw upfront on a layman, it becomes extremely difficult for people to understand? Or you think that they're in the right direction and they're trying to make it a little more palatable for, say, someone who's interested in forming a business in this line?
I will
I
add to
think,
that. It's an interesting follow up. Please hold on to your thought, Rajat. I'm sorry,
yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
don't forget it.
No, no, no
But
worries.
yeah, like from my understanding, you guys would be dealing with the MNRE at a government of India level, then various state department of NRE, New and Renewable Energy. MNRE is Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, for those who didn't know the acronym. And then they have their own related policies like PM Kusum, FAME, many more well-intentioned ones, for no doubt. uh, I guess a part of function of what you guys are doing is creating a pipeline for people to stakeholders to understand these things better. But stakeholders like business persons, etc., they like simplicity, they like savings.
Mm.
That's, I guess, part of what you guys are doing. But like Jess said, like, how is it translating on the ground? And yeah, basically that's the question, right? And with the language and the legalities and the complexities, Rajat and I, before we started this recording, we were talking about my dislike, and Rajat, I believe, shares it, for consulting jargon, heavy
Yeah,
consulting jargon. So
yeah.
how do you guys navigate that?
Maybe me and Mehul will have very different perspective on this because I've been doing this for 5 years. Mehul is doing this for now 1.5 years. So we've had this in length conversations about how policies can be better and all of that stuff. But credit where it's due. Central level has done a very good, work in at least helping people understand the transition and the policy framework in a very subtle manner, right? And in a very well explainable manner. And this I mean only at a central level, right? Central level policies, in my personal opinion, are headed in the correct direction, right? And what I mean, just to give you an idea, is a little, this is more on the technical side, but solar and wind are intermittent in nature. What I mean by intermittent is if there's a cloud on a specific day, your solar is not going to generate, right? So suddenly in the day, you will not have any generation. So it's actually very difficult to manage this intermittency, right? So because of this, the government or at the central level, they are moving to a more granular level of energy settlement, which is 15-minute level of energy settlement. Back in the day, it was monthly. Like you and I, as residential users, would only pay a monthly bill, right? We won't pay a 15-minute bill, essentially. But the center is moving to a granular settlement of 15-minute, and which is what I mean by the central level is in the right direction of, from a technical perspective, to maintain the grid sanctity. I think they're moving in the right direction. But the power that the state holds today to implement their own laws is where I would have a little bit of difference in opinion about how they could be a little better, right? They can adopt as it is what the center is saying, but what they do is they don't do that, right? They actually have their own versions of what could be, because they want to make their own laws and make their own profits, right? Whatever it would be. So answering in a nutshell, Mehul, you can take it up from there. Central level is in the right direction to move to a more granular settlement of energy analysis with more and more smart meters. There was a smart meter policy as well that every energy stakeholder in the country should have a smart meter. Now, that's because of the fact that they want to understand energy consumption at that granular level, right? And state, on the other hand, is taken the burden of implementation, which is not happening for whatever their own reasons. Now, I'm not saying it's easy. It is. It has its own challenges as well. But yeah, answering in a nutshell, they're moving in the right direction, but implementation still has a lot of challenges that need to be surpassed.
Yeah, I'll add some on it, some points on it. So, how I have understood these things, or like how I like to classify them is, so usually policy aspects are like somewhat, some most of the time straightforward in terms of, but in this
Yeah,
power sector use case, so policies are not just about, what can be the subsidy or some very base level tariff changes and all.
right.
They're also they also give you logics around in this much time of the day, if you have this much of excess, you can settle it in next few hours of the slot consumption slots. So there are like these complicated schemes which are there, and every state have their own such complicated schemes, complicated or like they're involved, like it's like, yeah. And I think states can do like, some sort of standardization for these things. Every state will have their own terms for these slots. There is no standardized naming for these slots. And whenever any amendments come, so I think still they are not ready. And I've discussed with Rajat also, there are cases like people file petitions, they file that these information is missing from the policies. So I think that's where I feel they should they should improve and make things more standardized, give more examples like what do they mean by these sort of settlements, so that these confusions are not there. And yeah, I think if they can do that as good standardization across states for terms of these slots and the processes where when you explain the policy, I think it will be very helpful.
And I'd like to
Right.
just mention one thing. Whatever you mentioned, Raj and Jay, on the PM Kusum Yojana, all of this, these are schemes, right?
Yeah.
They're not, they're essentially subsidies. I want to put that out. Like the FAME scheme. FAME scheme was adoption of, electric vehicles. So what they were doing is if you buy an electric vehicle and your electric vehicle has 10 kilowatt hours of battery in it, for every kilowatt hour, you're going to get some rebate, right? So these were subsidies or rather schemes to actualize it. What Mehul, I think, was trying to say was more than the scheme, there's a technicality of things that policies also define, right? Which is the more difficult thing to actually understand and grasp on the from the policy, right? So just for the viewers, I'd like to mention that the policy is being set, the schemes are set by the ministries, as you rightly mentioned, MNREs and all, but the policies that actually maintain the grid sanctity, which is the Indian grid, which is so interconnected, is by the regulatory commissions of the center and the state, which are the CERCs and SERCs of each respective state, right? So policies are different, schemes are different, and I'd just like to, maybe just put that out into perspective.
Right. And I think when you sort of zoom out a little bit, this is some issue that comes with doing business in India anyway. It's that things are very differing state to state. The variances are too high, and
Right.
that sometimes can disincentivize good business. But I guess there's reasons to be optimistic. Like you said, the central level has taken a lot of initiative on this note. But yeah, I mean, I think
Just to
we've
like,
had.
we
Yeah,
are
yeah,
also
please.
trying to solve that problem also, like how we can make it easy for businesses to understand the state level differences and come up with their own standardizations.
Right.
Hmm.
I
But
mean,
you're absolutely right, Raj. It's very different. But yeah, please go on.
yeah, I mean, it's like the variances are too high, and if you see
Yep.
the regulatory direction, the even the government somewhere acknowledges it in its own attempts. The attempt even at financial reform within GST was to sort of standardize the markets within varying policies around infrastructure, pensions, even policing, things like that. Government is trying to sort of consolidate things. So to their credit, they are trying to maybe reduce the degree or the metric at which every state is varying. Um, now I want to get a little bit to the theoreticizing part of it, and then we can speak a little bit about our conclusions, because I can do this all day. I'm having a lot of fun, but
We
uh,
can also do
uh,
this all day, by the way.
yeah.
But yeah.
We all wonder at some point, with our expenses, with our respective work businesses, that where are we going with energy security? We all keep engaging with the other N word, which is the nuclear word. Is that a feasible option? The regulatory feasibility of those kind of things. So let's move it from like our present day scenarios to theoreticizing a bit, which can also be a fun part. So let me pick your brain on what you guys think is going to be the future of renewables and how that ties into India's energy security. Also, forgive me for the background noise.
I don't think there's any background noise, but yeah. Uh, yeah, I think first credit where it's due, despite the whole variance at the state level, solar, wind have taken like pace because they make commercial sense, right? Despite the variances, let me put that way, right? Because solar and wind are an absolute baller of a technology. Uh, the only problem with them is to store the power because they're intermittent in nature, right? It's not like a coal or since you mentioned nuclear, where you just ignite the source and it will keep on going, right? So to put that into perspective, solar and wind are really cheap sources of energy as long as you utilize the energy. So, for a lot of the assets today, they have been put up because they all fell under the consumption curve. So, what I mean by under the consumption curve is they were all undersized for a specific consumption source, right? So, for example, if someone has a 10 megawatt round the clock, which is 10 megawatt every hour of the day, the solar and wind only powered, let's say, maybe 4 or 5 megawatts, right? So it was not generating excess, it was all under the curve, which is why they were all making sense, right? But as and when we progress, as and when we start meeting the threshold of that consumption curve, new technologies will have to get adopted, right? A lot of people talk about hydroelectricity, a lot of people, as you also mentioned, talk about nuclear. The thing about nuclear, hydro, and all are that they are very good to meet a base load, right? What I mean by that is they're not intermittent in nature. They will keep on rotating, like a hydro wheel will keep on rotating. A nuclear power plant, you ignite a source of uranium, thorium, whatever it is, and it will keep on generating power, right, at a constant power load. So what I see is, for different sources of energy, you meet a different consumption pattern, or rather a mix of all this will meet your consumption pattern. Because if you see at a state level, each consumption pattern is different, right? For example, maybe Karnataka has a peak of 100 gigawatts at 6 o'clock in the evening, but Maharashtra has a peak of 150 gigawatts at 6:30 in the evening, right? So things differ from state to state, and for each state, depending on the source that they can generate. For example, in Maharashtra and Karnataka, there is wind, but in UP, Delhi, and Haryana, there is no wind at all, right? So depending from the state to state, depending on their consumption pattern, will a mix of technologies that are categorized as renewable sources of technology will come into picture, right? And that's what I believe will happen. Nuclear has its own nuances, which we can maybe discuss as well, but that's how I see things getting evolved. There will be, for example, in Chennai, Bombay, which is close to the sea, there will be a little bit of different sources. There might be wind plus solar as well, but somebody who's landlocked might be just reliant on solar, right? So that's how I see it change over time.
Right. You can, I guess, start talking about deploying different types of renewable techniques in different areas.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hydroelectric power is efficient. We know China has done a great job with it. There is nuclear energy, maybe in France, which is very efficiently put to use. But
Absolutely.
with hydro and nuclear, there are issues about not in my backyard. I don't want
Correct.
any nuclear project anywhere near to where I live, and that's that causes issues with respect to how it impacts indigenous communities, neighboring communities. There are reports about, like, how damming areas of northern Sikkim have damaged some communities in that area. But damming does provide hydroelectric power too. Apparently China's working on making its highest ever dam somewhere in the Brahmaputra, which
Correct.
I think is concerning us because it may impact the flow of the river here. So,
Absolutely.
there are there may be very energy efficient outcomes which may not be as nature or as communities efficient. So there's definitely more research and more time to spend with that. This is every time we have a conversation about a complex topic, I realize that an hour and a half are too short, and sometimes you realize that 5, 6, 7 conversations can come out of it. Like nuclear energy is a conversation in itself.
Correct.
The hydroelectricity is a conversation in itself. So maybe Jack can ask his final question, and then maybe we can get into our conclusions. How does that feel?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I just add one point on the
yeah,
nuclear
Yeah,
part.
please.
Uh, yeah, so in the nuclear, what we have also understood is, yeah, there are a lot of advantages, but I think things which creates doubts are like it's a very long project, and your cost estimations sometimes go off. Right, it's a big development risk also, and then your waste disposal. How will you dispose the waste in your state to allow those sort of development? So all that people are actually not very clear whether nuclear will solve all our problems, right? So that is one view I wanted to put, that there are still a lot of challenges. It might be
Yeah.
a best source of energy producing, but energy generation, but there are a lot of factors like cost. Will the budget be able to suffice the development? And every year you add of a delay, it's like a lot of losses you incur. So all that needs to be sorted. But again, like there are a lot of modular reactors which people are coming up with to like make sure it can be deployed in more scale, and more awareness about the processes and advancements in the reactor technology. So all that is helping. But again, it's a challenge which we need to solve.
Yeah.
yeah. So my final question is with regards to solar energy, and of course, I'm also talking from a layman's perspective, and this question is with respect to geography. And I was reading somewhere that wherever you're trying to utilize as much solar energy as you can for generation, uh, a few people, what they did was they started targeting those geographic locations where they were confident that the sun rays would be constant, like say the desert areas, desert plateaus. So what do you think, where is our country on that, on that aspect of solar generation? Are we exploiting those the resources that we have? For example, the areas in the Thar Desert, or even Aravallis for that matter. There is a lot of dry areas in India which has like constant sunlight. So that's my next question, and the final one.
Yeah, and I mean, then you can sort of like, I'll just follow that question up with a slight policy recommendation on that, and then your conclusion with like your vision, and then we can conclude our conversation. So you both can take that.
I think I think from an average perspective, India is quite equatorial, to be very frank, right? Of course, I think if I'm not wrong, my geography is not that great, but we span from 8 degrees latitude to maybe perhaps 22, something like that. Perhaps I'm not too sure, right? Uh, so if you go from south to north, uh, there are very good energy generating locations in the south, right? Like your Tamil Nadus are absolutely brilliant, right? Your Karnataka is also quite good. Uh, but in the middle, it starts to kind of break a little bit for its own reason of, the Ghats region and a little bit of wind coming into picture as well. And then again, because of the geographical and arid region of Rajasthan, it's again higher. So to give you a perspective, so that data also is out there, in India, on an average, 1 kilowatt generates roughly 1200 to 2000 units of electricity per year. So to give you perspective, 1200 will be, let's say, the northeast regions, and maybe little less than 1200 as well. UP is roughly, let's say, 1400, 1500, 1700. But now within UP also, there are so many different locations, right? Rajasthan, for that matter, is, up somewhere roughly 2000. Uh, Tamil Nadu is, 1700 to 1800 units of electricity per kilowatt per year. Now, all of this caveat is on the fact that the technologies out there for solar panels work at an efficiency of whatever it comes out to be, 17 to 20%. People are working on new technologies to increase this 20% to 25%, so that the 1200 to 2000 number goes from 1500 to 2300, 2400, right? So it's not just a function of location, it's a function of technologies and how much irradiance can they absorb. So it's not about, as you rightly mentioned, sun rays come into picture, but it's essentially irradiance that comes into picture, and how much irradiance can one absorb. So
Could you define irradiance for the viewers?
yeah, layman, it is sun rays, right? But in technology, in technical language, it is photons that you can absorb, right? So photons is essentially the source of all energy, and how much photons can you absorb is essentially what uh, uh, how many photons exist is irradiance at a specific meter square, right? That's what is means irradiance, and how much it can absorb is the technical limit of solar panels.
Right.
Mehul, you want to add anything?
Before
Yeah.
Mehul, you start, I just again with Jay's question, with Rajat's follow up, I've just been thinking that there is so many more conversations we can have around batteries, export
Mhm.
and manufacture, and energy density, and those sorts of things. That it's just I'm seeing like 7 8 conversations just come out of this one. So I'm
Absolutely.
making mental notes. Mehul, why don't you give your thoughts on that? Like on what you were going to say. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah, I would just add, or maybe Rajat, like you can also maybe answer on this front also. Like, what do you think? Um, like, as a if I want to put a project, like, so how do I make a call whether I should go with Rajasthan or Karnataka or Tamil Nadu, right? So I think if you can answer that bit also, like, how do you choose, uh, like which state to go with, and also like how each states are making sure their utilization is higher, and if it is not higher, what is stopping them? I think that was also the question which Jay asked. Yeah.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, you just have to understand where your source of consumption is, right?
Hmm.
If your source of consumption is in a particular state, your first check should be that, hey, can I install a solar plant in that state or not, right? For example, if you are running, now Delhi is not a state, yes, but you still have commercial warehouses and commercial buildings in Delhi. but you cannot put up a solar plant in Delhi. Right now, that's not because Delhi does not generate a lot of solar, but it's because it's unavailability of land. So for everything you want to do in Delhi, you have to take it from a different state. But if let's say your factory is in Rajasthan, maybe it does make sense to go in Rajasthan. So three, four factors come into play. One is, of course, whether solar plant can be put up in your state, which is defined by the policy and the availability of land. Second is the generation, because as rightly mentioned by Jay, you have to check into generation as well. If you're running a plant in Assam, it's better to perhaps take power from UP, right? Maybe because it's because of there is land, but the terrains of land do not allow for solar efficiency to be there, right? So one is geographical aspect. How's the terrain of land? Is it more flat? Is it more hilly? Is it more, what kind of terrains exist, which also ultimately impact the generation itself. And finally, I would say that how much are the savings that you're putting? If let's say you are in a state where power is cheap, there are some states like Madhya Pradesh and Andhra and Telangana where power is still very cheap for commercial and industrial clients and even for residential. But if you don't care just about the savings and you care about the energy security, even as a consumer, you should anyway go ahead with the solar.
Hmm.
Right. That's quite a comprehensive overview. Uh, why don't you guys conclude with like your vision and where you guys see the renewables in the next 2 3 years, or like the medium term from like maybe now, and then we can sort of conclude this conversation for today. So you guys can take that individually again.
Yeah, absolutely. Mehul, you want to take it up or you want to give us like a half a minute to just think?
Um,
Fine, I'll
well,
go.
let's
I will go.
let's just okay. Sorry, yeah. Before Mehul starts, it can just be like where is renewables and its role in India's energy security going in the next 5 years? Very broad based question. Sorry, Mehul, I interrupted you, but
Yeah,
yeah, you guys can take that. And this is the final question. We'll wrap up after this.
yeah. So I'll go. Then meanwhile, Rajat, you can think and then you can tell.
Yeah.
So how I see is, so if you go into the nitty-gritties of how the projects are put, right? It is a long process. Like first few months you will plan, right? It's lot of things are at stake. So you spend a lot of time planning it. And then there is a post, like then there is a planning of financial things, technical things, from where will you source these panels and who will finance your project and all, and legal things as well, right? Clearing all the legalities and the compliances and all those things. And then is your development phase where you actually start developing the project. And then once the project is up and running, you need to make sure it's like an investment, right? You need to make sure they are giving you returns. And then if it is running, it has been run for some few years, and you need to decommission it also. So it's like a full big process, and a lot of stakeholders are involved, right? So, and you rightly said, right, there is a demand, like we are under producing energy. We need to produce a lot more energy, right? And that means we need to put a lot of projects faster. And that connects to, if we can reduce this, a year time or 9 month time to like 2 months or 3 months, then we would be able to help for this cause. Where if let's say in a year we could have put like, I'm just putting a number, 1,000 projects. So if you can reduce the time to project to lesser, so more people will be able to put more projects, right? So that can go from 1,000 to maybe 3,000, and that's how we want to contribute to this cause of. And it's all linked to your green energy as well, right? One is your financial gains of financial investments. Other aspect is also we need to move away from fossil fuel. It is very evident that you can read like lot of reports. There is no question about it. And if we can make that change now, then only I think it can be seen 10 years later. But if we don't make it now, we won't ever see also that it is in that critical stage. So I think broadly that has been our motivation and vision to make sure. And again, India is in early stages of rapid deployment of assets, right?
Right.
And if you see the graph of how much, and the solar and wind technologies also have become much better in last 4 or 5 years. So technology have become better. We have the capacity to install more projects. So that's the wave. That's the wave, and that's our vision. That if we can, you know, do something for that cause and work for it. So that is like a
Right.
broader and uh, yeah, overall, yeah, you there is also like maybe we can have a separate discussion on it. We should have actually, I think, like how the whole aspect of sustainability and what exactly are your carbon credits, and your energy markets. We could not cover in today's discussion, but all that game also is like it's still growing up, and we see a lot of opportunity there as well. How we can contribute with our own expertise of, we can solve a lot of problems in terms of capacity optimization, sizing optimization, what policy people should take. So all that expertise, we want to use it and help industries and, make better investments.
Right. It's like before you give your concluding thoughts, Raja. There's again, it keeps branching out to many more discussions that we need to have. Can you also make a part of your final concluding thoughts? My mom is also sitting right here. She's been hearing a bit of our conversation, and her concern is that if hypothetically she was to run her whole house, which is an operation in itself, because we have a small tenancy thing going on, then we have an Airbnb kind of thing. So, how cost efficient will it be? Will she be saving money? And her question is basically what's on the mind of every layperson that deals with energy in their day-to-day consumption, savings, and all of that. So, why don't you make this a part of your concluding remarks? And
Yeah,
while I think about many more discussions we can have around renewables in the future. Right. So, Rajat.
absolutely. I was actually, yeah, while Mehul was concluding, I was trying to break it down to three verticals I can conclude on. And the three verticals I could think of for this, at least, whatever 1 hour conversation we've had, is policy is the first vertical. The second vertical is the demand, like your mom is the demand, to be very frank. And then is the supply, right? So I'd like to just maybe conclude in these three verticals for today's conversation. uh, Policy is a cause and effect relationship, right? What comes first, whether deployment or policy comes first, is a never ending game, right?
Mhm.
uh, you will release a policy, people will adopt, but people will have its own problems. So India has its own open forums to for the stakeholders to put up their points, and then the regulators and the forum regulators will take a note of this and keep updating policy, right? So I want to conclude the first point saying that policy is a never ending game, right? But it's lovely that the Indian government has allowed people to reply to policies while they are in draft and make the changes. Whether they are upset or happy after the actual policy comes out is a different point of debate. But this whole uh, culture and this whole network that the Indian regulators have allowed the stakeholders to participate is actually quite beautiful, right? And maybe we can have a separate discussion on that. But I'd like to conclude saying on the policy front that it's heading in the right direction. And the fact it allows for open debate is actually very healthy. And folks like us, you, me, can actually, take part in understanding and putting up our thoughts and, kind of take it in a way that we deem fit for the Indian transition of net zero goals, right? So that's pretty exciting to me, at least. From the demand side, I'd like to say that demand is not a problem, right? Because of the current policy structures and the fact that solar has become so cheap. And I'd like to maybe answer Auntie's point as well, that demand is not a problem because over time you are paying more money for the electricity that you consume. because you come under a certain threshold, you come under certain class of consumer of electricity, and the the power prices are increasing for the distribution company. So you are paying more and more as you go. But if you put up a solar today, your price gets fixed, right? So it's actually hedging against future prices is what I'd urge most consumers to think about. Are you hedging against electricity prices in the future or not? Is the math you have to do today. In a nutshell, if I have to answer, there are certain banking and net metering schemes that you can take up for your house, where what you have to do is how much ever electricity you generate, you just sell it to the grid, right? So for example, you are consuming 100 units every day from the grid at 6 rupees. Now you sell everything to the grid at, let's say, maybe 4 rupees, but you only generate, let's say, 80 units, right? So you only have to pay the grid for the 20 into 6, essentially. So there are these certain schemes where definitely it will make sense to you, right? But if you want to go completely off the grid, for example, if you don't want to have any grid connection and you just want to have a solar and a battery, that might be a little expensive, but with the battery costs again plummeting, it might make sense maybe in the next year, next 2 years, or next 3 years, right? So it's an open debate as to what kind of solution you want to adopt. But that being said, demand is not the problem. Most technologies today are making sense, at least for the commercial and industrial clients, and for some people at the residential level as well, because like in Bombay, like in Delhi, we are paying exorbitant prices, right? But the problem then comes is, can you put up a solar on your roof? At least in your house, I know you can put up a solar on your roof, or somewhere you can do something, right? But not everyone lives in like a house. They live in like buildings where you have to, it's a different kind of consumption pattern altogether.
Mm.
But
Yeah.
demand is not the problem. I'd like to conclude and say that supply is the problem, because demand has overshot. Supply, again, not from the solar panel side, but from the substation connectivity side and the land acquisition side. I today can purchase solar panels off of Amazon, but to get a substation approval, to get a land approval, is a place where government comes into picture. So a lot of the substations out there are uh, running over capacity. So there is no more solar to pump in a lot of the substations. So me as a developer, me as a supplier of energy, has to go find the substation that I need to power my electricity into, right? And that is the challenge today. There are development and deployment challenges rather than the demand challenges. And that is what most of the suppliers in the market are solving for. Governments are also solving for that. They are opening up tenders for putting up new substations. Essentially, uh, a transition from generation to transmission is where the substation
Right.
comes into picture, is what I
Mm.
want the viewers to also note. That
Yeah.
substation plays a very crucial part in ramping up the voltage and ramping down the voltage. And all the links between the four pillars of electricity market is channelized by substations, and that is what we also need to build. Just as a food for thought, batteries also help for substations. So batteries are not just put up at the generation side, they are also put up at the substation level. So just want to conclude, policies are heading in the right direction. Demand, not a problem, because people want to go green. That is the biggest demand lever that people have. People don't just want to do this for savings. People want to put up solar because they have this inherent belief that, hey man, there is doomsday coming at some point of time. So demand is not the problem. Savings are also happening. Supply is the problem. And with more and more local and domestic regulate compliance from a EPC perspective, for example, governments want people to adopt local manufacturers than international manufacturers, and not source from China, to increase more and more on our trade deficit. So that is where the supply challenges, perhaps they're not, from a domestic supplier point of view, they're not the best panels, but the supply is a problem from that perspective as well. They are overbooked on capacity. Maybe that is going to take more time. If they are overbooked on capacity, for every new plant, there is going to be
Rajat, I think I lost you for the last 10 seconds. Am I audible to you? Hello?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
think there was a network issue for a second. I think you can just repeat the last 4 5 seconds of what
I
you
was
were.
just saying that that's how I would like to conclude. Like, demand is the problem, supply being the bigger challenge today, and policy heading in the right direction to actually
Got
help
it.
this demand supply problem is where policy should be heading. And that's how I'd like to conclude.
Got it. I think this was a fairly interesting conversation. I've learned a lot, and I'm, along so many spheres, I'd like to do various structures at some point with you guys whenever we can collaborate again. Thank you so much for joining us. So I think we can conclude today.
Thank you
Thank you,
so much,
guys.
Raj. Thank you so
Thank
much,
you,
Jay. Yeah.
thank you, Jairaj. It was
Yeah,
fun.
fun talking for sure.
Yeah, it was
Just
a
to kind
great
of,
conversation.
yeah, me and Mehul just keep talking to each other, so that's the problem. But when we try to explain it in layman and for the viewers, I think it will help crystallize our own thoughts better. So this was helpful.
Right, absolutely. Thank you for joining us, guys.
Thank you.